Ladies and gentlemen of Trackmania, you have been lied to. Trackmania is not the game you thought it was. Trackmania is not the happy racing world you know it as. Trackmania is not the joyous international motorsport that unites the world as one. Trackmania is much more dark and sinister than that. Recently, I was watching a video entitled Ross's Game Dungeon, Trackmania 2, Canyon. And in it, Ross begins to wonder why there's a track in the middle of a canyon, and soon comes to the conclusion that the environments of Trackmania take place in a post-apocalyptic world. And at first I thought, well, how silly. A racing game couldn't be set in a post-apocalyptic world unless the devs decided to make that the setting. But as I dug into the games further, I soon came to realize that Ross wasn't crazy. He was right. So, how did Trackmania bring about the end of the world? Well, all the clues were there. And all that was needed was someone to come in and stitch them all together. And that's where I come in. So, I present to you the Trackmania Conspiracy. So, before we can even get into how this whole apocalypse went down, we need to lay out a timeline to get ourselves oriented. We're going to start off with Trackmania Original, which will be known as the Stone Age. It was the first game in the series, and compared to most of the other environments, it's pretty tame and doesn't take too many risks. Sure, the car might go on two wheels, but humanity was just beginning to realize the potential of this new motorsport, and they didn't want to go all out, just in case something terrible had happened and caused a ban on the sport, something akin to the Le Mans disaster of 1955. After the Stone Age of Trackmania Original, we arrive at Trackmania United Forever. TMUF will be known as the Cozy Years. Yes, some of the environments have their crazy quirks, like Coast being inhabited by old people, or Island being the furthest humanity reached at that point in terms of speed and technology. But humanity was just beginning to find ways to make racing more exciting, more prestigious, and more dangerous. But, for the most part, these environments could be grounded in reality and in safety. But as we all know, as time moves forward, so does the technology. As humanity got their hands on better and better technology, we began to push the limits of what was possible on the track and to see just how far our thirst for adrenaline would go. Now, towards the tail end of the Cozy Years, we have the Turbo Years. These years are defined by the fact that all four environments are included in Trackmania Turbo. These would be the last years of humanity's life before the world fell apart. This would also mark the end for the last time humans would ever be able to watch the sport without interruption. We know this because at the start line of every track, there are speakers that play the sounds of cheering fans, meaning the races are televised for millions, if not billions, to see. And after all is said and done in the Turbo Years, we find ourselves in the dark ages of the world, and even that has its own mini-timeline. Valley, Lagoon, and Canyon from TM2 will make up this era. To start, Lagoon marks the step between the final hours of modern society and the coming apocalypse. As you drive around, you're going to notice some tall buildings. Some are businesses, others are housing, and even the famous Trackmania Hotel makes an appearance. Society is still together for the most part, And I do say the most part because at this point, humans stop driving the cars and they just let AI do the work. I'll return to this point a bit later in the video, so don't worry. Valley showcases the new and hopeless world that humanity inhabits. While there are some structures around, there's nothing too noteworthy. Also around this time, as the world was beginning to fall around them, people took up religion in the hopes of being saved in the end of days. And as is evident by the countless number of church towers that cropped up, ringing their bells to sound the coming apocalypse, I don't think this is too far off from the truth. Canyon is where Ross makes his theory of the apocalypse coming in full swing. Cars no longer have drivers. They don't need them at this point. Mankind has long since taken its last breath from the Earth's surface. The tracks are remnants of an age gone by, before the quiet canyon, before the automation, before the sky fell onto the heads of those below. Once we pass the Dark Ages, however, we arrive at the Age of Resurrection. Nations Forever and TM2 Stadium will make up this era. Just by moving the camera out, we can see the stadium suspended in the air by some unknown force, in the sky, in the middle of nowhere. These years would be the best humanity would have following the end of the world. Technology would advance somewhat, leading to a much larger play area, but with the world no longer around, mankind would race in the clouds, safe from the horrors that befell their ancestors. We can even hear the faint cheers of a crowd upon loading the stadium menu, which pays homage to a simpler time before it all went to hell. And for the rest of this video, we'll be focusing on the TM2 environments and the TM Turbo environments for our End of the World conspiracy. Now that we've put the timeline together, we need to map out where in the world the environments are located. That way we can get a sense as to how devastating this doomsday scenario was, as well as the direction the resulting world-ending tidal wave went. To start off, Canyon is located in the Grand Canyon in Arizona. We come to this conclusion because the start sign says, "Welcome to Canyon Grand Drift," and I'm willing to bet the Nadeo team did not have the rights to use Grand Canyon. Moving on from that, Valley takes place somewhere in the countryside of Russia. Russian lettering is present on the finish block every single time, as well as the strong Russian bear that's ready to eat you at the finish line. Lagoon takes place in China, which we can figure out from the red panda signs that are around the track, the red panda being a native animal to China. We also see countless amounts of Chinese lettering in all of the rice fields. And finally, Stadium. Stadium takes place in Japan, which is evident by the cutesy animal balloons, the Japanese lettering, and the bustling Japanese metropolis that surrounds the International Stadium. So now that we have all our locations, it's time to dive into what exactly went down. So, we have our timeline, and we have our map, but the question still remains, how did Trackmania cause the apocalypse? After looking over every detail of these games, I've come to the conclusion that humanity, and more specifically the Japanese, were the ones to bring about the end of the world. But how, I hear you ask? Drink, spit, and body moved into the upright position? Well, I'll tell you how. Trackmania Turbo was released in 2016 and included 4 environments: Stadium, Valley, Canyon, and Lagoon. Now, during the loading screen, you may get a little quip at the bottom of your screen. Whether it's useful or not is besides the point, but there's one bit that points to humanity as the bringers of the apocalypse. This one phrase reads, "Fast fact, the engineers who designed the International Stadium exploited a legal loophole which exempts it from the laws of gravity." Now, I'm no lawyer, but to the best of my knowledge, the laws of the universe are absolute, with no way to break them. Unless you're a black hole, that is. If that's the case, then you're literally too big and too scary for the universe to even care about you, leaving you to do whatever you please, including breaking the laws of the universe. And by looking up the definition of exempt, using it as an adjective, we get the following. Free from an obligation or liability imposed on others. By being free from the liability of gravity, the engineers were able to remove gravity entirely and control it. And from what we know, the International Stadium is, or was, located in Japan. So, how does this tie into the apocalypse? Well, in order for space to even exist, there needs to be gravity. What is gravity? Well, to quote the definition given to us by starchild.gsfc.nasa.gov, gravity is a force of attraction that exists between any two masses, any two bodies, any two particles. Gravity is not just the attraction between objects and the Earth, it is an attraction that exists between all objects, everywhere in the universe. So everything has gravity. Stars, black holes, you, a building, a car, that yippy little dog that lives across the street that you want to boot into the stratosphere. They all have gravity. And if there's no gravity, well, bad things start to happen. In my quest to uncover the truth, I stumbled across an article from Futurism.com outlining what would happen if gravity were to disappear. In the article, it tells us that immediately upon gravity leaving, we'd start floating, and that might sound awesome. But the problem begins when you look at the atmosphere and the bodies of water on Earth's surface. Because without gravity, quote, the air in the atmosphere isn't compelled to stick around. Earth's oceans, lakes, and rivers would also depart. So there you have it. Because of one exemption from gravity, humanity kickstarted the apocalypse without realizing it, due in part to their never-ending quest for extreme motorsports. But that still begs another question. How is there water in the other environments? My theory? We're dealing with a substance that isn't water. Keep in mind, the environments of Trackmania 2 have cars without drivers. You don't pour water into your cars, you pour oil. The water is merely oil that's been recreated to look more like water. Or maybe it's something else entirely. The way the cars behave when they come into contact with this water either has them bouncing off the surface or floating around in a zero-gravity-like environment. But what about all the shrubbery and all the trees that we see in canyon and lagoon, and even valley? Well, those either have roots that stretch out for miles in search of water, or they're plants that can last for long stretches of time without water. If it's the former, then there must be some water buried deep in the ground that we humans were unable to get. Okay, so now I want to discuss with you guys the direction of the resulting gravity-breaking tidal wave of destruction. We will start in Japan shortly before everything falls apart, but once it does start falling apart, we're going to move west. Now, what is west of Japan? China. Lagoon takes place in China, and everything seems fine. You know, you have the Trackmania Hotel, it's a nice tropical paradise. Things are doing pretty good. But as we go further west, the worse these effects will become. Valley starts to have its own breakdown. Towns are evacuated, which paves the way for drivers to race where they want, however they want. If you drive around any valley track, you're going to notice little buildings, and they seem abandoned. This is where society begins to break. And once we pass Valley, our last stop is Canyon. It honestly wouldn't be too far off to say that the rest of the world at this point looks like Canyon. Dry, hot, desolate, dead. It's honestly amazing that humans managed to survive at all. Well, for the time being, that is. Soon, humanity turned to AI to drive their cars. Tracks were becoming too dangerous. The number of racers were starting to dwindle as those who stuck around after Japan ended up losing their lives either on the track or in the harsh living conditions. But with this introduction of AI, the races could continue, keeping the shameful population entertained as each one of them lay in a ditch waiting for death to take them away from the land they had once thrived on. And soon, the people who were left behind on Earth would die off. And with no one around to watch, the AI just kept racing. It was all they knew. They had no idea that humans had died off, and even if they did, there would really be no reason to try and rebuild society. The AI didn't know how to create a society of any sort, as all they were good for was racing. And even if they could sow those seeds for a new society to rise from the ashes, they would only be able to create more tracks to race on. So, humanity went from racing behind the wheel to creating AI to do the racing for them. And as we can see from all of the vehicles from all of the turbo environments, each of them has a person behind the wheel. But when we go to the TM2 series, that's when we notice something. Why does Stadium have a driver while all the others, Valley, Canyon, and Lagoon, don't? My theory? Because the International Stadium was located in Japan, the Japanese must have created some weird anime-style getaway to save themselves and the others from their respective countries to continue racing in the safety of the clouds. These would be the last humans alive anywhere in the universe. This also supports the theory that AI are the ones that drive the cars of Canyon, Lagoon, and Valley, leaving Stadium to have human drivers. But if there's no gravity and, by extension, no water, then how are there clouds in Stadium at all? It's quite simple. The engineers who survived the apocalypse and rode the International Stadium to safety were able to create an artificial atmosphere and planet. So here's what I mean. If you were to set up a boost and a jump, you can leave the stadium and fall into the void, but at some point you would hit the bottom. Or, well, you should hit the bottom. But as you fall, you will eventually leave the world you've inhabited, and as you enter the black abyss, you're able to look back and see the blue dot of your home getting smaller and smaller. And now you're falling through the darkness of space. All the stars you see are the stars from the furthest reaches of space. The sun is merely an engineered star, behaving much the same way as our sun did. This artificial sun was used to keep the remaining humans alive, while those in power of this new world struggled to find a way to get back to the way things were. It also helped keep the population from going insane. And you know what? Here's some more food for thought. Out of all of the in-game currency names that we could have gotten, why? Why did we get planets? I mean, it's easy to point to the fact that the universe of all Nadeo games takes place in what we know as Mania Planet, but it really doesn't take a scholar to realize that the planet's currency is some sick joke to remind us of what those engineers did all of those years ago, to keep us in the dark about what truly happened to those that came before us. And Nadeo thought that we wouldn't notice. So there you have it. Trackmania isn't just a racing game, but a game that showcases the apocalypse, hiding it behind a coat of paint that makes it seem like everything is okay. And I ask all of you, why? Why wasn't this connection made sooner? Why has it taken us so long to open our eyes and see the game for what it actually is? And to you, Hylas, I have one question. When? When were you going to tell us the truth about the franchise you created? When were we going to find out the true meaning of this game? Were you even going to tell us, or were you hoping to just keep us in the dark while you sat and counted your millions, your hands stained with the blood of countless Mania Planet drivers? Well, it's too late now. I've exposed your little secret to the world, and you thought no one would notice the subtle hints. No one would make the connections. No one would go this far down the rabbit hole to uncover the truth. But I did. And now everyone knows the truth. And I know that we've got that new Trackmania game coming out soon. I cannot wait to see what twisted secrets you've hidden within it.